Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome back to the Double Waved Yellows podcast. Today, we are looking at the 2021 Austrian Grand Prix, and as always, joining me in the commentary box are Hodders and Tyson. Hodders, we have got a lot to talk about in this feature-length podcast.
You can say that again, but in the interest of brevity, let's not.
Okay, and Tyson, we've had two sets of support races, the Formula 3 and the W Series. We'll be looking to get into those in quite a fair bit, and a lot of action there to talk about as well.
Yep, as you said, a hell of a lot to talk about this week.
Mm-hmm. Sadly, we do start on the sad news that the former Formula 1 driver Carlos Retuemann has died at the age of 79. He raced in Formula 1 from 1972 to 1982 for Brabham, Lotus, Ferrari and Williams, racking up 12 wins, 45 podiums and 6 pole positions. To date, he was the last Argentine driver to win a Grand Prix, and he also drove in the World Rally Championship in 1980 and 1985 in the Rally Argentina. Carlos Retuemann passed away due to health reasons on the 7th of June. Or July, sorry, and condolences from everyone at Double Wave Yellows to his family, to his friends, and to his former colleagues. Anyway, moving back to the race weekend, Tyson, tell us what happened in the Formula 3 support races.
Right, lots of good stuff to talk about in Formula 3 this week. So, as always, it follows the established 2021 format. Friday qualifying sets the grid for Sunday's feature race. Reverse top 12 of qualifying sets the grid for Sprint Race 1. Result of Sprint Race 1, top 12 get reversed. That sets the grid for Sprint Race 2. And I said last time out, I was expecting some exciting races from Austria, and yeah, Formula 3 delivered the goods right off the bat on Saturday morning. Lots of spectators in attendance, which was great to see, and they were rewarded with an incredible race to kick off the weekend. The lead of the race, the top 3 positions, just constantly changing. Action on every lap, courtesy of an 8-person DRS train. The main freeway fight for the lead between Logan Sargent, Matteo Nannini, Clement Novalak. It looked like one of those 3 was going to take it, but Sargent started to fall away near the end of the race, and then Nannini and Novalak just had an unfortunate coming together with a handful of laps to go. Nobody really at fault, both of them racing hard, neither wanted to yield at the corner, and it just ends in tears for both of them. In the end, it was the championship leader, Red Bull Junior Dennis Hauger, who emerged triumphant. He played the long game, saved his tyres as the others were using theirs at fighting at the front, and just carefully picked his spot to advance through the pack through the race. Very sensible strategy, pulled it off to perfection, gained 11 places from reverse P12, and absolutely earned that win to extend his lead in the championship. It was definitely an action-packed race 1, but the drama wasn't over at the checkered flag, as there were 11 drivers penalised after the race for track limit violations and incidents in the final laps, which had a major impact on the grid for Sprint Race 2, with 8 of the top 12 finishes affected. Ollie Caldwell kept his second-place finish after his penalties were added. Other drivers only dropped a handful of positions, but Logan Sargent was hit the hardest out of everyone. He ended up losing his third place to Jack Doohan, and penalties dropped him all the way back to 15th, putting him outside of reverse grid for Sprint 2. And as a side note, this probably won't be the only time we'll be talking about track limits and aggressive defending today. So, after all those were added together and the grid was decided, it was David Schumacher who inherited reverse pole, and he controlled Sprint Race 2 beautifully, leading from lights out to earn his first victory in Formula 3. Once again, I have to use that phrase I love so much, but a brilliant recovery drive from Arthur Leclerc, whose DRS got stuck open in race 1, sent him for a trip through the gravel, which caused him to start 27th for Sprint Race 2, but once again, showing his overtaking prowess and made up 21 places throughout the race to finish P6. Winner of race 1, Hauger, was able to make up 9 places from P12 to put him on the podium for a second time. And Frederick Vesti also had a solid race, staying up there in the podium positions and ending with a well-earned second place. But his moment really came in Sunday's feature race. Vesti, Paul Sitter Hauger, Alex Mollier, a great freeway battle for the lead, similar to what we saw in the first sprint race. But in the end, it was Vesti who came out on top. Fought his way to the front early. Hauger and Smolia didn't make it easy for him. They traded the lead a few times, but Vesti was able to fend them off to take his first win of the season, banked himself 25 points to get his championship chase up and running. Once again, Hauger had a solid race, played the sensible strategy, didn't take any risks, and hung on to third to complete a triple podium weekend, scored himself a huge haul of points. Rounding out the podium in the feature race was Ollie Caldwell, who had a very solid weekend after a disappointing outing last time in France. 2 podiums over the weekend brought him back up the championship standings, but he was very fortunate to gain those after almost being wiped out by his teammate Leclerc. Leclerc collided with Victor Martin, just ran out of space attempting to go overtake and spun down the track at high speed. Scary incident, but fortunately it wasn't a major one. Everyone involved was unharmed. So those were the main takeaways from the races, but other things worth mentioning. Jack Doohan was having a solid weekend after a podium and top 10 finish in the sprints, running well in the feature, but then contact with Jack Crawford took both of them out of the running. Very unfortunate. Weekend to forget for Victor Martin, who came into Austria second in the championship standings. Respectable P5 in Sprint 1, running really well in Sprint 2, second place, but then ran out of power with a handful of laps to go, and then the collision with Leclerc in the feature, just capping off a miserable weekend for him, which is probably going to have ramifications in his championship chase. Kyle Collett had an interesting weekend. Looked like he'd taken pole position in qualifying, but then had his lap deleted for a track limits violation, which dropped him to 4th on the grid for the feature race. And then more bad luck followed as he stalled on the grid. But he was able to fight his way nicely through the back to finish 7th place and salvage something from it. Then there was a bit of bad news in the form of Caleb Frederick, who was taken to hospital after a collision in Sprint Race 2 with a fractured dislocation of his left thumb. He wasn't able to do the feature race, but fortunately it's not too serious, and hopefully he should be back for Hungary. Overall, great racing, all 3 races, and I highly recommend going and checking out the first sprint race if you can. So, to the championship standings. Dennis Hauger's hat-trick of podiums gives the Norwegian driver a huge haul of points and now gives him a dominant lead in the championship with 115 points. Frederick Vesti's great weekend catapults him up into second with 74 points. Despite his bad luck in the feature race, Jack Doohan's good showing in the sprints keeps him in third, 72 points. Ollie Caldwell's double podium brings him back into championship contention, sitting on 4th with 70 points. And rounding up the top 5, Victor Martin's disappointing weekend drops him down to 5th with 66 points. Those are the main championship contenders. Hauger pulled out a very nice gap at the top, but still 12 races still to go, so many points up for grabs, absolutely anything can happen. Very close fight for the other podium places with only 8 points separating second from 5th. At the end of the month, we'll be heading to Hungary for round 4, but that wasn't the only action we had in support races this weekend, as we were also treated to some W Series action. And this is where I'm going to hand over to Hodders to give us the rundown on that.
Thanks, Tyson. An eventful weekend as ever in the W Series, as we had deja vu for the second round of the 2021 series, with the Austrian WP following the Styrian WP the previous weekend. Jamie Chadwick back on form. She had the fastest time in practice. Ira Sudakova second and Baitska third, moving back to form. When it came to qualifying, it was somewhat eventful. After just 2 minutes, there was a red flag due to Sabercook spinning off into the gravel, therefore with a dump to her name. Only a 4-minute delay, though. And interesting to note that the top 10 were all within 1 second of each other in qualifying. Pole position, back to form for Jamie Chadwick. Baitska in second. Emma Kimmerlein third, though actually relegated down to 6th due to the grid penalty she received from the previous race. Therefore, it was Bruna Tomaselli third on the grid. Elsewhere, Sarah Moore 7th on the grid and Belen Garcia 9th. Alice Powell, having qualified in first and got the whole Grand Chelem last weekend, or it's not the Grand Chelem, she was down in 12th due to car problems in practice and qualifying. And Vicky Priya also with a 3-place grid penalty from the previous weekend, therefore on 15th. To the race itself, where it's the wonderful 30-minute +1, that bite-sized format, there was a yellow flag off the bat at the start of the race, once again due to driver stalling, including, and this is such bad luck for her once again, Baitska Visser. As a result, she stalled and therefore would end up finishing outside the top 10. Jamie Chadwick finishing first, start to finish lead, and I think she won by around a good 6 to 8 seconds in the end. Impressively, Irin Sidakova, having already qualified quite strongly, ended up in second in the end, having qualified sixth. Emma Kimmerlinen's grid penalty didn't really cause any problems. She did end up finishing in third place at the end. Bruna Tomasella, unlucky to finish fifth. She held off Sarah Moore for a good 10-15 minutes of the race before being passed by the British driver. Despite the previous car troubles in practice and qualifying, it was an 8th place finish for Alice Powell, and Fabienne Volvend rounding out the points in 10th place, having qualified 14th. The real reversal of fortunes came from Miki Koyama, who, despite finishing 5th in the Styrian W Prix, finished back of the grid, although all drivers did finish in the end. When it comes to the driver standings, well, it's a British top three. Jamie Chadwick's win takes her up to first on 33 points. Sarah Moore, not far behind on 30 points. Alice Powell on 29. Still worth keeping an eye on fourth place. Ira Sidakova's second place takes her up to fourth place for the 18-year-old, one of the youngest drivers on the grid. Now, while the W Series doesn't publish their own team championship standings, I've created my own, and it couldn't be closer at the top, with Scuderia W on 44 points, ahead by just a single point ahead of Veloce Racing, which is Bruno Tomaselli and Jamie Chadwick. Scuderia W is Belen Garcia and Sarah Moore. Pleasingly, after this weekend, all the 9 teams have points, and it's worth noting for the next round at Silverstone, there will be a change on the grid. Goja Rades will have finished her 2 races as a reserve driver with 2 points to her name, and we'll have a 6th British driver on the grid at Silverstone, as British Formula 4 driver Abby Pulling has her turn as reserve at the next race.
Excellent stuff. Thank you very much, Tyson and Hodders. Lots and lots of racing happening away from the glare of the Formula 1 spotlight, but it's definitely a racing series that we encourage you to keep an eye on, and we will, of course, continue to bring you reports of those events as the season unfolds. Moving on to the main event, the Formula 1 Austrian Grand Prix, and Max Verstappen extends his lead at the top of the Drivers' Championship after a commanding win at the Red Bull Ring, his second win at the Red Bull Ring in consecutive weeks. Bottas in second and Lando Norris in third rounds out the podium. Hamilton's poor season continues, finishing fourth, and it's penalties galore from the race stewards. Over 10 penalties handed out during the Grand Prix weekend, which we will discuss in a little while. So, taking a look at the drivers in focus for this week, myself and Hodders have chosen 3 drivers to cast a glancing eye over. And my one to start off with is the race winner, Max Verstappen, completing the Grand Chelem, leading every single lap from pole position, winning the race and obtaining the fastest lap. He was on pole by just 0.048 seconds. Not from either of the Mercedes, but from Lando Norris, the McLaren driver, very nearly nicking it off the Dutchman on Red Bull soil. Controlled the early safety car restart superbly. Max pitted on lap 32 to change from his used mediums onto a brand new set of hards. He then pitted again on lap 60 as he had a 30-second margin over Bottas for a new set of hards, meaning he could go out and set the fastest lap. Hodders, just pure dominance from Max Verstappen, not just this weekend, but the last 2 race weekends at the Red Bull Ring.
Yeah, it's safe to say that on the home turf of the Red Bull Ring, that Max Verstappen just really is not putting one foot or hand wrong. His pit strategy was one of the fastest based on Pirelli's suggestions, and that seemed to pay off handsomely. His restart was controlled superbly from the safety car, and really, I don't know how he can be stopped at the moment.
And Tyson Hodders has set it up really. Can Max be stopped going, in particular, into the final couple of races before the summer break?
Yeah, Max is having a great season, isn't he? It's very much his championship to lose at the moment.
But we have seen weirder scenarios. We just have to wait and see how it pans out. Hodders, the first of your 3, you were keeping an eye on the flying Finn at Mercedes, Valtteri Bottas.
I was indeed, and compared to previous weekends where we were racing, we didn't have a bad shot really. He was high-flying most of the weekend, 4th in free practice 1 and 2nd in the second practice session. In the end, qualifying in fifth, which, while it maybe seemed disappointing for Bottas, it was still a very comprehensive fifth, and he showed some promise. During the race itself, he started to pick up positions. For quite a while, he was behind Lewis Hamilton and told not to race him until it was eventually determined that Hamilton had enough damage on his car that they basically said to Valtteri, right, go for it. And I think it was quite a tactical decision as well to prevent Lando Norris overtaking both of them. So for the Flying Finn, a much improved weekend of late.
Excellent stuff. And first, with the news that we'll get into a little bit more, that Lewis has extended his contract at Mercedes. Valtteri is now battling to keep his seat at Mercedes, or risk losing it at the end of the season. And it's a performance that will, make the Mercedes bosses think, yeah, he could be worth keeping next year.
Very much so, and this is the kind of performance he needed this weekend. He needs to be there scoring those points for Mercedes, because they are in a very fierce battle with Red Bull in the Constructors' Championship.
Indeed so. So the next driver I was keeping an eye on was Carlos Sainz, car 55 in the Ferrari. Qualified in 11th, missing out on Q3 by just 6/1000ths of a second. George Russell pipping him to that final spot in qualifying 3. Promoted to 10th after Sebastian Vettel's grid penalty. Finished in 6th place, but was elevated to 5th after Perez's race penalties. He was allowed to pass Leclerc via team orders on lap 65 when it was clear that Sainz was the fastest of the two Ferraris, and then passing the McLaren of Danny Ricciardo with a lap and a half to spare, and then was able to close the gap on Perez sufficiently enough, finishing on the road behind Perez by just 9.2 seconds, but after the penalties were imposed, finishing just 0.7 ahead. Hodders, a good, solid performance from Carlos Sainz.
Absolutely, and considering some of the occasional blips he's had on recent weekends, he's definitely getting an improvement back to form and is rather helping Ferrari out as a result.
Mm-hmm. And Tyson, so far, I think it's fair to say that Sainz are... They're matching. He's matching Ferrari's expectations. He's constantly qualifying the top 10, and he's constantly finishing in the points. Which, at the moment, given what Ferrari are trying to do to rebuild the team back to their winning ways, it's good work.
Yeah, it is. I was beginning to get a little bit worried for Sainz after he moved from McLaren, because I didn't think Ferrari would give him the equipment to show his talent. But yeah, they are having a very, very good year.
And long may it continue, we hope. Speaking of Spaniards, Hodders, what happened with Fernando Alonso?
Well, what didn't happen with Fernando Alonso, really? First thing he didn't do was take part in free practice 1 on the Friday, as it was one of those weekends where some of the Formula 2 drivers got a spin in the Formula 1 cars, and in the place of Fernando Alonso, there was Guan Yu Zhou taking his seat for that practice session. Back to normality for the other 2 practice sessions, where he was middle of the table. He did get through to Q2, but did finish up in 14th on the grid. He was middle of the pack all the way through, and was quite a battle in that middle section towards the end of the race, as he was fended off by George Russell for no fewer than 15 laps before finally gaining the upper hand a few laps from the end, and a well-earned point for Alpine.
And again, it's those much-needed points in the midfield that Alpine desperately need. Tyson, that battle we saw between Russell and Alonso, we're looking also at Lando Norris. The future really is bright for British drivers.
It certainly is, yeah. Russell, he did so well to hold Alonso off for as long as he did. And I believe Alonso, after the race, even said he was gutted when he realised he'd taken the last point away from Russell. So, yeah.
It'll come. And Horace, just quickly back to you. Fernando Alonso, he's having a comfortable season. We're all thinking, should he really be in? I think he's, the oldest driver on the grid. He's doing a comfortable, solid job for Alpine.
Yeah, I mean, we were curious about his presence on the grid in the pre-season, in the preview, but he's having a quiet, relatively uneventful, but I would say constructive middle of the pack season so far. He is justifying his place with the Alpine team.
Excellent stuff. Good to hear. So the last driver I was keeping an eye on, and we have just mentioned him, was George Russell. Qualified P9, getting into qualifying 3 for the first time with Williams, and a superb performance at that. Started P8 after Sebastian Vettel's grid penalty. Finished 11th at just 5.5 seconds outside the points, and as we just alluded to, a superb battle with Fernando Alonso. Slight blemish on his mark was he was showing the black and white flag towards the end for a rather dangerous blocking move, moving in the braking zone, which you're not allowed to do. Hodders, Russell is just chipping away. He's going to get that points finish eventually.
I think it's almost, well, not to tempt fate, but I think it could be a definitely maybe by the end of the season he'll get some points on the board. I mean, he really does deserve them. I mean, you look at last weekend where, had it not been for all the mechanical mishaps, shall we say, that caused him to retire last weekend, he really was in contention for points. To get into Q3 by that slim margin, even so, he got there, and he's been knocking on the door for that for so long. I would say watch this space. I think points will come. He's just got to keep at it.
And Tyson, going into the British Grand Prix, what a fantastic opportunity it would be for him to score points at home.
I would love to see it. He's going to score points eventually. I'm sure of it.
And it would be great for him and for Williams. And lastly, we've mentioned him a couple of times already. Hodders, Sebastian Vettel, another poor weekend.
Oh, unfortunately, yes. I mean, he started well enough. I mean, he was in the top 5 and 10 in the later, not qualifying, practice sessions. Unfortunately, while he did qualify 8th in qualifying, he did end up with a 3-place grid penalty for blocking. He was, middle of the pack, falling away towards the end, and then unfortunately ended up retiring in 17th place after 69 laps due to that collision with Raikkonen, where Raikkonen was deemed to be at fault. We'll come to that later on, and finishing 17th, a very poor weekend considering his recent form.
Not good. Tyson, whereas we've been discussing the likes of Alonso coming back and still being fairly consistent, Vettel's been very inconsistent. He's either had superb races where he's been bringing a huge haul of points for Aston Martin, or he's having these sorts of weekends where he's just falling down the field.
Yeah, and it's not really what you expect of a 4-time world champion. You expect someone to have that consistency there, constantly bringing in points for the team, and there's just no consistency there. I am surprised because I thought the Astons were going to do well after seeing the pace in practice, but they just seem to fall away.
Well, hopefully Aston Martin's home Grand Prix coming up, quite literally their home Grand Prix, the entry to the garages is literally opposite Silverstone HQ, but we'll cover that in a bit more detail later on. Right, race penalties, and oh my goodness me, we had 10 race and qualifying penalties in total imposed by the stewards, so it's fair to say they had a busy weekend. First and foremost was Sebastian Vettel's 3-place penalty for blocking Alonso in qualifying 2. The drivers were clearly told in the drivers' briefing that you're not allowed to back off between the last two turns, and Vettel did exactly that. Hodders, 3-place, bang to rights.
Absolutely bang to rights. It's one of those penalties that was clear cut. If you start blocking people during qualifying, you will be punished for it, as he was.
Absolutely. And on to the first of the 9 race penalties, and this one probably the most contentious of the lot. Lap 4, Norris and Perez go wheel to wheel into turn 4. Perez trying to go around the outside. Norris easing him off slightly, real wheel to wheel action. But the stewards didn't see it that way. They saw it as forcing another driver off track, and Norris getting a 5-second time penalty, which he served at his first pit stop. Tyson, was this a fair penalty?
Well, we were watching the race, and you heard my reaction at the time when that penalty came up. I don't think it was a deserved penalty. It was good, hard racing from both of them. Neither were going to yield at the corner, and yeah, I think it was overly harsh by the stewards, but Norris kept his head down, kept on going.
Indeed, and Hodders, could Norris have finished second were it not for that penalty? Obviously, mathematically, yes, but in terms of actual track racing, could he have beaten both Mercedes?
I still think, I think we discussed this before, I think had Bottas not been permitted to pass Hamilton, he could well have taken them both in that situation. They could well have been sitting ducks were it not for Bottas overtaking. I think the penalty was a little bit harsh in hindsight, but I suppose at the same time, as we'll come to later, it was ensuring even application of the rules.
Absolutely. And it's always been mentioned the fans want to see this great wheel-to-wheel racing. For me, I think this was a little bit harsh. I suppose 5 seconds, it's the lowest of the penalties that the stewards could have handed out. So there is a bit of a positive side to that. But I think the fans want to see wheel racing. We don't want to see these sorts of penalties, cheap penalties. But at least they were consistent throughout the race weekend. Next one, Yuki Tsunoda got a 5-second time penalty for crossing the pit entry line on lap 12. Again, in the driver's briefing, the drivers are told that there is a sort of pit entry line similar to the pit exit line on the way into turn 9. That the drivers have to commit to coming into the pit lane. And Tsunoda, although it was only I think his front left wheel that was over the line. Hodders, another one of those black and white ones, clear as day. It has to be a penalty.
It absolutely does. We saw that penalty, and it was clear as day. There was no argument with that one, even with video evidence. And it'll be disappointed to have got that penalty as well, I think.
It was a little bit of a joke going round on the Mini Drivers YouTube site that because Tsunoda's so small he couldn't see over the top of the cockpit and couldn't see the white line, which that's a little bit cruel, but yes. And we were obviously talking about penalties for hard driving. I think this one we would all in agreement of. Sergio Perez collided with Leclerc on lap 41. At the same point, in exactly the same circumstances, lap 41, a 5-second penalty. Tyson, I suppose if Norris was going to get a penalty for what he did, Perez was a slam dunk.
Yeah, and that I will give the stewards. There was consistency there. They penalised Norris earlier. Exact same incident with Perez. They had to give him the penalty. Once again, if they hadn't given him the earlier penalty, I would have said it's just hard racing. But yeah, consistency.
Absolutely. And Hodders, do you think this penalty might have been partly down to the fact, had Perez had the red mist settled because of his collision with Lando earlier on?
I think it's a tricky one as well. I mean, I think had the penalty on Norris not been applied, I think this one may not have been. They were of similar nature potentially, although Perez was a little more deliberate. I do feel though that he just needs to calm down.
Absolutely, and it's starting to rack up the penalty points, which we'll cover shortly. Next penalty, lap 46, Lance Stroll. Damn it, I did it again. Lance Stroll. Oh dear. 5-second time penalty for me for that one. Lance Stroll getting a 5-second penalty for pit lane speeding, which he was duly served that penalty post race. And then the second collision between Leclerc and Perez. Leclerc tries to go around the outside of Perez on lap 47 into turn 6. This one, Tyson, clear as day. Perez shoving Leclerc off the track.
Yeah, this one for me was much more clear-cut. And we've seen Perez do this in the past, this kind of defending. When he was teammates with Okada at Force India, he had a bad habit of pushing him around like this.
And Tyson, we've mentioned it in conversations, obviously during the race and earlier this evening. Could he have got more than 5 seconds? Because this was a real biff off the track, wasn't it?
It's very possible. He just, absolutely shoved him off the track. So I think he's lucky to just get away with 5 seconds on that one.
And Hodders, do you think Red Bull should have instructed Perez to let Leclerc go, given that his second offence, it came up on the timing screens, he was under investigation? Do you think it could have helped mitigate things just to say to Sergio, look, let him go. You're in big trouble already?
I think it would certainly have diffused the situation and prevented the second penalty from taking place, I agree. And I agree with Tyson's surprise with the second 5-second penalty at the time. I mean, I think we were discussing during the race that I was surprised that it wasn't a more substantial penalty, such as 10 seconds, as in other sports, when you would end up, for example, I think in football, if you've had one red card, your subsequent red cards are worth a more significant penalty.
Indeed so. Next incident, again, poor Yuki Tsunoda. Lap 51 comes into the pits for the second time, and again crossing the pit entry line, giving him another 5-second penalty, which he served post-race. And then a substantial incident at the end of the race. Kimi Räikkönen colliding with Vettel on the final lap. Kimi Räikkönen given a drive-through penalty, or effectively 20 seconds post-race penalty. Hodders, what was Kimi Räikkönen doing?
I'd love to know that one as well, because it's not an easy thing to explain. I mean, that was incredibly dangerous, and I think it could have been a lot worse, potentially, as well, but on a different corner, or a different track, on a different day with different conditions. I think the head had gone for some reason there. I mean, that's not what we'd expect from any driver, let alone Kimi Räikkönen's pedigree.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, you mentioned in the build-up that had this happened, a few laps earlier, we could have quite easily had a safety car, or had it been very late on, we might have even had a red flag to ensure a sprint finish. But this is not the sort of driving that we expect from the 2007 world champion. And obviously that then triggered a lot of yellow flags being waved, and in particular double wave yellows. Two drivers failing to adhere to that. Latifi and Mazepin both given a 10-second stop-go penalty, or because it was done after the race, they were docked 30 seconds. Tyson, pretty much slam dunk penalties for both of them there.
Yeah, you can't be ignoring the double yellows like that. We've been over this in the past.
Mm-hmm. And Horace, it's not as if they can't see him. In the old days, it might be a case of that they couldn't see the yellow flags being waved, but now obviously you've got these great big flashing neon boards with that are clearly showing double wave yellows. It's shown on their steering wheel, the yellow lights flashing. They're told on the team radio, and also you saw all the gravel flying up in the air. These drivers have got absolutely no excuse at this level.
I quite agree. I mean, I think with many sports, and Formula 1 especially, there's the age-old adage that ignorance is no excuse for making mistakes like that. Clear as day with so many things. I'm surprised they got away with such a lenient penalty.
And that moves on actually quite nicely to sort of the question I want to discuss with you, and Hodders will come to you first. Räikkönen, Latifi and Mazepin should, instead of these time penalties being handed, which have basically had absolutely no effect on their race result, should they have been given grid penalties going into Silverstone?
I wouldn't say that they shouldn't, in theory. I mean, the comparison I'm already making in some cases for some of these penalties, particularly in regards to Räikkönen, I'm already casting my mind back, as listeners will remember, viewers will remember, to the Styrian W Prix, when Emma Kymäläinen took out Beitske Visser, caused a lot of damage, and she got a 3-place grid penalty for this weekend just gone's W Prix in Austria. So you could wonder whether the same penalty could be applied in that case. As for Latifi and Mazepin, that I think at the moment they're on last chance. And I think if they do it again, I think a grid penalty would be perfectly justified. I mean, there is no excuse to ignore double yellows on several occasions, and the drivers know this.
Absolutely. And I mentioned on I think it was on WTF1's season preview, I could see Nikita Mazepin getting more penalty points than Hamilton gets race wins. Hamilton's had 3 race wins this year. Nikita Mazepin is already up to 5 penalty points, so quite a prophetic guess there. We'll come on to the penalty points. So at the moment, Lando Norris is at the top on 10 points. He's too short of a race ban, although 2 of these will come off of his licence on the 12th of July. Sergio Perez is next up on 8 points, although 1 point comes off his licence on the 16th of August. Tyson, Lando Norris and Sergio Perez, 2 drivers that we love to see race. They're real hard fighting drivers, but these guys need to be careful.
Yeah, they just need to watch themselves, keep it clean on track, just make sure they don't accrue any more points.
Indeed. So, and also some news just coming out yesterday. Michael Massey has ruled out any changes to this penalty point system. Obviously, Lando, in particular, feeling he's been very unfairly penalised, getting 2 penalty points on his licence for his offence. But equally, Sergio Perez for each of his offence, 2 penalty points, 4 total. I think this penalty points system, it is done fairly. We've never seen a driver banned because of these the penalty point system. Is it just a case that Lando and Sergio just need to be careful?
I do think caution needs to be exercised in this situation. When you look at the points they're already on, I mean, I suppose the fortunate thing is that Lando will have 2 points lapse on the 12th of July. I think the person that really needs to be careful is Sergio Perez. I mean, it's not unfeasible that he could yet, I'm not wishing this on him at all, believe me, he could well be one of those first drivers that ends up falling foul of the penalty point system and facing a race ban. So every driver needs to be on their guard. Although I do think the system is working effectively and fairly.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think the way it works out that if you hit your 12th penalty point in practice or qualifying, you are banned for the rest of the weekend. If you hit it after the race, then obviously it's the next race that you get banned for. And so we may need to clarify it, but hopefully it doesn't happen. So moving on to our winners and spinners, as usual, both myself and Hodders pick a driver out who's had a memorable weekend and also a driver who's had a weekend to forget. Hodders, I'll start with you. We've been seeing his praises quite a lot over the last few weeks. George Russell.
Absolutely, he's my winner for the second consecutive race weekend. Last time it was based on what he could have achieved after those mishaps. This time it's what he actually did achieve. He had a solid and stunning race weekend. He got into Q3 for the first time, and by a very narrow margin, 6,000s, mind you, and we were cheering him on all the way through that Q3. You should have heard us. And a very strong 8th on the grid in the end. He held off Alonso for 15 laps, which is no mean feat. Very unfortunate not to score Williams' first points this season, but I think they will come.
Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned earlier, Alonso singing George Russell's praises, so that's always good to come from a 2-time world champion. My winner, the other successful British driver on the grid for the weekend, Lando Norris, a superb performance throughout the weekend. We thought he was going to squeak his first ever pole position, but just falling short by 0.048 seconds. Very unfairly penalised for the contact with Perez, but he kept his head down, he kept racing, and he achieved his 4th podium of the season. And even Hamilton, when he ended up getting past Lando earlier on in the race, was singing Lando's praises. Tyson, great for both Lando and for George, 2 multiple world champions singing the praises of 2 up-and-coming British drivers.
Absolutely, and I just wish they were in similar cars so we could see the competitiveness of both of them. Hopefully, that's what we're going to see in the future, because they, for me, are the future of Formula One.
And it's great stuff to see. Hodders, we'll come on to your spin now. I'm not going to repeat what you put in the comments about him, but I think it's fair to say the Mexican Sergio Perez had an absolutely awful race.
Yes, I'm not using Spanish profanities either. Let's just say that his intelligence was questionable on this one. We'll leave it at that. Anyway, Sergio Perez, really, he was absolutely rightly punished for forcing Leclerc off track twice. I think he was very unfortunate not to receive a more severe penalty for that second offence, where I feel he should have done. And he just, seriously, he needs to calm down. Otherwise, he could well get that race ban due to his penalty points. And I worry it's more likely than not at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, though, we talk about the penalty points coming off his licence. That's not going to happen until after the Hungarian Grand Prix. So if he has 2 more race contact incidents at Silverstone and the Hungaroring, he will become the first driver to receive a 1 race ban for these points system, which you couldn't argue with. He would rightly get. Looking at the driver, I felt had an absolutely appalling weekend. For me, it's Kimi Raikkonen. An absolutely needless collision with Vettel when they were battling out for, I think it was 14th and 15th. Raikkonen having qualified 16th. I do question really, what is Raikkonen, aside from obviously his experience, what is he bringing to Alfa Romeo? When quite clearly there are a lot of drivers in Formula 2, especially those who are part of the Ferrari Driver Academy, who could do a really good job and really help to push Alfa Romeo up the grid. Tyson, we were talking about promising drivers who are our winners for the weekend, but equally we are looking at highly experienced drivers who are our spinners.
Yeah, I have no idea what was going on with Raikkonen. It looked like he just completely checked out once Vettel passed him. He made the pass, and then suddenly there's a wheel in the side of Vettel, and both of them go off track. And I think it was a bit rich, to be honest, for him to complain about Norris forcing him off the track earlier in the race, which, as I said, just looked like hard racing for me, to then do the same thing twice later on to the same driver, no less. That's just no good.
Absolutely needs to be careful going forward. Okay, on to the talking point, and the main news in the paddock on Saturday morning was the announcement that Lewis Hamilton has signed a new 2-year contract with Mercedes, extending the partnership up until 2023. It will be his 11th season with the German manufacturer. And Tyson, we are really now looking at who is going to be partnering Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes next year. Valtteri Bottas, George Russell, could there be another driver in the mix?
Personally, I would love to see Russell in that Mercedes. Just give him a car he can use.
Yeah, we saw that the performance in Sakir towards the end of last season. Hodders, could there be a potential outsider that could come in and replace Bottas ahead of Russell?
I don't think it's impossible. I mean, we could have somebody from F2 or elsewhere coming in. But again, I can't think of any names. I wouldn't want to name names and tempt fate. But again, it's entirely possible to promote from outside.
Mm-hmm. Hodders, we've had a lot of race penalties handed out this weekend. Do the drivers as a whole need to have a real think about what's going on? Is it likely that the race director, Michael Massey, will be having strong words during the drivers' briefing at Silverstone?
I feel like a strongly worded briefing from Michael Massey is inevitable. I mean, this is the second time he would have to do so, but in this case, it is very much justified when, once again, there are needless penalties there, and once again, unacceptable penalties for flouting double wave yellows again.
Mm-hmm. Indeed so. Right, let's move on to the championship battle. Lewis versus Max, round 9. And Tyson, yet again, it is a conclusive victory for the Dutchman.
Yeah, Verstappen has just been on it in Austria. Hamilton's had no answer for anything.
Mm-hmm. Hodders, Max is just absolutely running riot over Lewis. And as we mentioned earlier, the Dutchman is just making absolutely no mistakes. Mercedes, to be fair, the last few weekends, I don't think Mercedes are making mistakes either. It's just the raw pace that this Red Bull has.
It really does seem to be a pace thing. I mean, when you consider that Max Verstappen had a potential win in his hands earlier in the season where he missed out purely because his tyres blew, and that was really bad luck. Had it not been for that, I think he would have a very good chance of winning, and it could have been a much bigger gap than it is now. So I'm hoping he doesn't make any mistakes, but he can't get complacent either.
Yeah, it's a good point you make there, because obviously Bahrain, he could have won the race had he not exceeded track limits. Azerbaijan, he was on course to win that until obviously that tyre failure. But equally, we look at Lewis. He could have brought in a huge haul of points in Azerbaijan, and just absolutely threw it away. And he got lucky to get points in Imola after going off in the wet, and he was saved by the red flag. Tyson, I think it's fair to say that with all the incidents the two drivers had, Max is legitimately leading the championship by a fair distance.
Yeah, he is putting the results up on the board. And Hamilton, I don't know if it's him feeling the pressure. We're just seeing so many uncharacteristic mistakes this season.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, Tyson, next race is Lewis's home event, the British Grand Prix. He needs to sort of ask the crowd for a bit of help, I guess, in getting his car home first.
Absolutely. I think the home crowd will definitely be cheering him on.
The vast majority of the 140,000 spectators expected at Silverstone next weekend. And finally, looking at the championships standings after round 9. So Max Verstappen extends his lead to 32 points, now more than a full race clear. Max on 182, Lewis on 150. Sergio Perez on 104, Lando Norris close behind on 101, Valtteri Bottas on 92, Leclerc and Sainz, the two Ferraris, 62 and 60 points respectively, Danny Ricciardo on 40, Pierre Gasly on 39, and Sebastian Vettel rounding out the top 10 on 30 points. In the Constructors, Red Bull extend their lead to 44 points clear. They're now more than a full race clear. Red Bull on 286, Mercedes on 242. McLaren a long way behind on 141, but a good clear distance between them and fourth place Ferrari on 122. Alpha Tauri on 48, Aston Martin just 4 points behind on 44, Alpine on 32, starting to drop away from the midfield pack, Alfa Romeo on 2, and Williams and Haas yet to score. So moving on to our final thoughts, and to let all motorsport viewers know that the Goodwood Festival of Speed is on this weekend. It is showing on Sky Sports F1. It is also being streamed live on YouTube, so be sure to check that out. Hodders, we've also had the information this week that the Australian Grand Prix unfortunately has been cancelled due to COVID. Unfortunately, we're losing the race at Melbourne for the second year in a row.
Yes, it's a real shame, though. At the same time, I think it was slightly inevitable, considering the strict protocols that Australia currently has in place and with the quarantine as well. I think it was always going to be a push, but we can at least hope for 2022.
Indeed so. And Tyson, that does bring the calendar down to 22 races, which isn't too bad. We've got a 4-week gap between Brazil and Saudi Arabia. Do we look to find, do F1, the FIA, Liberty Media, do they look to find a replacement Grand Prix, or would actually have that autumn break be really, really good for the teams to recover? Bearing in mind, we've got 2 triple headers after the summer break.
There's an argument for both sides of it. Of course, I'm disappointed to see that the Australian GP won't be taking part, especially with the modifications that were made to the track that I was very much looking forward to. But yeah, 2 triple headers, maybe they could do with a 4-week break.
We'll wait and see. And of course, any news we have on calendar change, we will bring it to you at the next podcast. So that's just about time to round everything up. So coming soon, we have got next weekend, as we've alluded to, the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, and it's the first of the 3 sprint races that are going to be trialled. 2 weeks after that, we've got the Hungarian Grand Prix at the Hungaroring before a 4-week summer break. And then after that, on the 29th of August, we have got the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa-Francorchamps, the part of the second triple header. We will be doing a VSC podcast next week to explain sprint qualifying, sprint races. So be sure to join myself, Hodders and Tyson for that. On the 22nd of July, we will have the Double Waved Yellows British Grand Prix podcast coming out. Looking ahead to the British Grand Prix, and sorry, Hodders, I am going to say it, racing is coming home. What are you looking forward to?
I shall let that one slide from our early discussions. But hey, following this weekend, you never know at all. Racing is coming home. I agree with that one, actually, and it is fair. I'm looking forward to the fact that we have a British Grand Prix with a full house, with all the necessary precautions, and I think that's testament that things are going well for that to actually take place. I'm looking forward to, once again, another triple header, including the W Series for the first time at Silverstone rather than Brands Hatch. What a grace that'll be for the 6 British drivers on the grid.
Absolutely. And Tyson, this is the chance for the British drivers and the British teams to really hopefully make an impact.
Yeah, hopefully so. This is very much Red Bull's championship to lose at the moment. Max is absolutely on form. Lewis always performs well at Silverstone. I'm expecting a great race between the two of them.
We will wait and see what happens. So that's all from all of us here at Double Wave Yellows podcast. Thank you very much for listening. If you stayed with us for, I think it's over 40 minutes we've been going for now. As always, don't forget to leave a comment, like and subscribe, all very important. Be good, and if you can't be good, be safe. We will speak to you next week to explain the sprint format on our VSC podcast. From myself, Hodders and Tyson, take care and goodbye. And clear.